Well, let's cross live to the UK House of Commons, where Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing his weekly grilling from MPs in Parliament.
From their misery, they must be broken up and brought to justice. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow will be the first ever nationwide nurses' strike. All the Prime Minister has to do to stop that is to open the door and discuss pay with them. If he did, the whole country would breathe a sigh of relief. Why won't he?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have consistently spoken to all the unions involved in all the pay disputes that there are. But I am glad he's raised our nurses, because they do incredible work, and it's worth putting on record. It's worth putting on record what exactly we have done for our nurses. Last year, when everyone else in the public sector had a public sector pay freeze, the nurses received a 3% pay rise. When the RCN asked for more in-work training, we gave every nurse and midwife a £1,000 training budget. And when they asked for nurses' bursaries, we made sure that every nursing student received a £5,000 grant. That's because we do work constructively, and we will continue to back our nurses.
Mr. Speaker, nurses going on strike is a badge of shame for this government. Instead of showing leadership, he's playing games with people's health. And there is a human cost. Alex from Chester has been waiting for a gallbladder operation for nearly 6 months. He's in so much pain, he's been off school since then. His operation has already been cancelled twice. His mum, who I spoke to this morning, is worried sick. When she heard that strikes could be called off, she was massively relieved. She's desperate for the Prime Minister to resolve this. All he needs to do is simply meet the nurses. Now, Alex's mum is listening to this. She doesn't want to hear him blaming everybody else. She doesn't want his usual ducking of the question. She's tuned in now because she wants him to explain what is he going to do to resolve the nursing strike.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not just Alex. There are millions of others across this country, millions of others who will have their healthcare disrupted because of the strike. Now, the Honourable Gentleman says to get round the table, but we all know what that means, Mr. Speaker. That is just simply a political formula for avoiding taking a position on this issue. If he thinks the strikes are wrong, he should say so. If he thinks it's right that pay demands of 19% are met, then he should say so. What's weak, Mr. Speaker, is he's not strong enough to stand up to the union.
Mr. Speaker,
We know it's Christmas, but the party's not started yet. Come on, kids.
Mr. Speaker, in 12 hours' time, there's a nurses' strike. All he needs to do is meet the nurses. His inaction speaks volumes. As ever with this Prime Minister, it's Tory politics first, patience second. We've never seen a nurses' strike like this before. They've been forced into it because the government has broken the health system. Ask anyone in the NHS. They will tell you they don't have enough staff. 133,000 vacancies. And there's an obvious solution. Scrap the non-dom status and use the money to bring through the next generation of doctors and nurses. That's what Labour would do. Why hasn't he got the guts to do it?
Mr. Speaker, we're already investing billions more in the NHS. We're already hiring thousands more doctors and nurses. But he asked about backlog. He asked about backlogs and the waiting times in the NHS. And yes, what he always fails to acknowledge is the impact that COVID did, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're facing pressures. But we do have a plan. Not just more money, not just more doctors and nurses, new diagnostic centres carrying out millions of checks and scans, new surgical hubs delivering more elective surgery. But if we'd listened to him, Mr. Speaker, the backlog would still be growing, and that's because we'd still be in lockdown.
As usual, Mr. Speaker, he tries to blame everyone else. His department commissioned a report into the NHS which reported on Monday. That report said we've had 10 years of managed decline. It was not COVID. Responsibility is sitting right there. And the reason he can't choose nurses over non-doms is because he's too weak to stand up to tax avoiders. For 12 years, they haven't trained enough doctors and nurses. So we have the absurd situation of the NHS spending billions on agency workers to fill the gap. Why should the country have to put up with money that should be spent treating patients being wasted plugging gaps instead?
Mr. Speaker, let me tell the honourable gentleman what we are doing. We are actually listening to the independent pay review bodies. They want to undermine them. We've offered a fair pay deal. They can't even decide on a number amongst themselves. We're actually protecting the public. They're protecting their paymasters, Mr. Speaker. For working people in this country, it's Labour's nightmare before Christmas.
There he goes again, pretending everything is fine. Try telling that to those on waiting lists or those that can't afford to pay for a next-day GP appointment. After 12 years of Tory failure, winter has arrived for our public services, and we've got a Prime Minister who has curled up in a ball and gone into hibernation. If he can't act on behalf of patients or nurses or everyone who wants these strikes called off, then surely the whole country is entitled to ask, what is the point of him and what is the point of the government he's supposed to be leading?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about COVID not having an impact. Ambulance waiting times for Category 1 ambulance waiting times in February of 2020 were actually completely on target, Mr. Speaker. COVID has an impact, and that's why, as the Chief Executive of the NHS has acknowledged, this government is serious about its commitment to prioritise the NHS. But, Mr. Speaker, let's just have a look at the NHS in Labour-run Wales, shall we? Speaker, let's just have a look at the NHS in Labour-run Wales, shall we? The worst A&E times in the country, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, under the last Labour government, we had fair pay for nurses and no strikes. So I won't be taking lectures from him about that.
Order. Mr. Bowie, you promised to behave. Don't give me a Christmas present you won't want. Come on, Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, this is our final PMQs of the year. So I hope you will Oh, really? I hope you will... Mr. Speaker, what I was going to say was I hope you will pass on all of our thanks, at least on this side, to all those who kept our house and our democracy working. Yeah. And I want to finish this year thinking about our friends in Ukraine. As a result of Putin's barbaric assault on their freedom, millions will spend Christmas in sub-zero temperatures without heating, electricity or hot water. Their suffering is unimaginable, but their bravery is awe-inspiring. So will the Prime Minister join me in saying that whatever other difficulties and disagreements we have across this dispatch box, we are and will remain united in our unwavering support for Ukraine's freedom, its liberty and its victory.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I join with the honourable gentleman in thanking and paying tribute to all the staff of the House for the fantastic work that they do to support all of us. And I appreciate his comments on Ukraine. It has been a point of incredible unity across this House and indeed the country, something that we can all be proud of in our country, that we have stood behind Ukraine at its hour of need. And as I said yesterday, this Christmas, many families will be laying an extra place at their Christmas table, and that speaks to the generosity and compassion of our nation, and long may that continue.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A3 connects London to Portsmouth through Guildford, and I was delighted to see the new Solent Freeport announced last week, which will increase traffic flows. As the A3 narrows through Guildford, it is sadly the most polluted road in the strategic road network. Short-term sticking plasters like putting up 9-metre-high air pollution barriers that will entrench divisions in Guildford is not acceptable to me or my constituents. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it is time to think big, it is time to think long-term, and it is time to tunnel the A3 under Guildford?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question. I know this is an issue that she has long championed. I am told that National Highways are developing a range of different possibilities and solutions for the A3 through Guildford, and I know the Department for Transport will consider the case as it plans its future infrastructure investments.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
I wish to join with the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition in extending my party's thoughts to all of those involved in the terrible tragedy in the Channel this morning. Mr. Speaker, thanks to positive and proactive negotiations between the Scottish Government and Unite and Unison health unions, a pay settlement has been reached and strike action averted. By stark contrast, the UK Health Secretary appears completely unwilling to negotiate with unions on pay, and strike action is very much still on the table.
Shame.
So may I ask the Prime Minister, when will he see the error of his ways and follow the Scottish Government's lead?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the UK Government was able to provide £1.5 billion in extra funding to the Scottish Government for public services. The Health Secretary and other ministers have engaged fully, not just with the unions, but with an independent pay-setting process, which takes the politics out of the process and ensures that we can meet those independent requirements with a fair pay deal.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear, those words will ring hollow in the ears of those people who, unlike the Prime Minister, can't nip into Waitrose for their shopping, nor indeed even turn on their heating at this moment in time. And that's particularly true for people in Scotland, because as we know, average energy bills in Scotland are not anticipated to be £2,500 per year. They're expected to be £3,300 per year. People are genuinely terrified, and that's despite the fact that Scotland produces 6 times more gas than we consume, with some 80% of our electricity coming from low-carbon sources. Decades of failed UK energy and regulatory policy coming home to roost. Is it not the case that Scotland has the energy? We just need the power.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad the honourable gentleman raised the question of energy support, and it's because of the actions of this government that we are providing every household in this country with around £900 of support with their energy bills this winter, £55 billion worth of support, and on top of that, next year, there will be extra cost of living payments worth up to £1,200 for the most vulnerable, whether that's those on means-tested benefits, pensioners, or indeed disabled. This is a government that will always look after the most vulnerable in our society.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend will know, the Mayor of London, despite objections, has decided to expand the ULEZ zone across all London boroughs, which will massively impact my constituents and those who share a border with London. Will he therefore urgently speak to the Transport Secretary and encourage him to use the powers at his disposal to reverse this disastrous decision?
Well, my honourable friend will know that transport in London is devolved to the Labour Mayor of London, but it is disappointing that the Mayor, backed by the Leader of the Opposition, is choosing not to listen to the public. The zone is being expanded against the overwhelming views of residents and businesses, and I'd urgently consider the Mayor and the gentleman opposite to be on the side of hard-working Londoners.
David!
Can I associate myself and my party with the comments made by others on the tragedy in the Channel? Our thoughts and prayers are with the families' victims. Mr. Speaker, 40% of cancer patients now wait more than 2 months for treatment after an urgent referral from a GP. That's the highest proportion on record and way above the government's own cancer waiting target. I lost both my parents to cancer as a child, And so, like many people across the country and in this House, I know the devastating impact of treatment delays on cancer patients and their families. So I'd like to ask the Prime Minister 2 questions. First, can he give a cast iron guarantee that the dreadful cancer backlog won't get any worse? And second, when will the government meet its own cancer target?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the right honourable gentleman's parents. Indeed, I'm sure many of us across this House have our families have been tragically affected by what cancer does, and he's right to raise the importance of meeting our targets. And what I am able to tell him is we actually are experiencing very high numbers of cancer referrals following the pandemic. He'll be aware of that. But thanks to the brilliant work of our NHS staff, cancer treatment rates in the most recent month for which we have data are now back at pre-pandemic levels, with a plan for them to increase further. And recently the NHS also announced plans to fast-track patients direct to cancer tests rather than have to wait for specialist consultation first. These measures will make a difference, and I look forward to updating on them in the new year.
Gary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Cheadle was to get a banking hub. Unfortunately, my delight was short-lived. When on closer inspection I saw that it was Cheadle, Staffordshire. Whilst I remain pleased for the other Cheadle, would my right honourable friend agree with me that my constituents also need to access to cash and banking facilities to protect businesses and support our high street? And will he support our local calls for post office banking hubs?
My honourable friend is a fantastic champion for Cheadle in Greater Manchester. She will know that the Financial Services and Markets Bill will establish a legislative framework for protecting access to cash, and alongside this, firms are already working to provide shared services, as she mentioned, like bank hubs. But what I would encourage my honourable friend to do is to contact Link, which can undertake an independent assessment of a community's cash access needs and determine if shared facilities are appropriate.
David Hamilton.
You're watching the final round of Prime Minister's questions for the year 2022, where the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is facing his weekly grilling by MPs in the House of Commons. And this comes as Labour strikes continue to cause disruption in the run-up to Christmas. The Prime Minister paid tribute to the way the Commons have come together in a cross-party way to help Ukraine. And this is coming as Christmas, and many families are laying an extra dinner table, according to him, an extra dinner table place for a Ukrainian family. And he says, and this is the show of UK's generosity. Starmer has also retorted that under the last Labour government, there was fair pay for nurses and no strikes. And he ended his own round of questions by raising the war in Ukraine and the millions there. And he says, we'll spend the winter in sub-zero temperatures, suffering unimaginably.
Of course, a huge focus on the national healthcare system, although Prime Minister Rishi Sunak did decide to start by paying tribute and expressing his sorrow at the capsizing of a small boat in the Channel and the tragic loss of life. And straight after that, of course, is when Keir Starmer went straight into questioning when the nursing strike would end, as he shared tragic stories about patients waiting for medical attention. Now, Starmer says under Labour, nurses had fair pay and there was no strike. But he says it's his last PMQs of the year, and he thanks the Commons staff and, of course, turned his attention to Ukraine and the suffering, which he described as unimaginable, but their bravery is awe-inspiring. And he says the Commons should remain united in its support for Ukraine. And Sunak agreed with Starmer, and he paid his tribute to those hosting Ukrainian families this year. So on that very profound note, the PMQs, the last session of PMQs for this year, will be rounding up soon.